welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the top 20 cards from Dominaria United for Commander. Of course, this was a very good set for Commander overall because it was a very legendary heavy set. Tons of commanders, obviously. As far as the 99 cards go, which I will be talking about today, not necessarily the best I've ever seen, but there are definitely some good ones, and there is a few that for sure we will be seeing in the format quite a bit. I will first give a mention to the cycle of lands they came out with here that I'm actually shocked they never came out with these before. They're just very simply 2-color lands that enter the battlefield tapped, but they have the land types, which of course is really important. So Molten Tributary is an island and a mountain, and that can be really relevant. It counts towards land types, obviously. It also can be fetched by something like a Farseek. Obviously, these are going to be incredibly accessible so that people can get their hands on them. They're just a nice budget cheap option for people if they want to be building more colors in their decks. I have an honorable mention just because I really think this is a fun, interesting card. Academy Lore Master, blue and a blue human wizard, 2/3. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player may draw an additional card. If they do, spells they cast this turn cost 2 more to cast. I just think this is such a funny, interesting card in a commander game, right? You are giving your opponents the option. Obviously, you can as well. You're giving everyone the option to draw an extra card on their draw step. But if they do, all their spells are going to cost 2 more to cast. I love that. That's so interesting. This can actually be a pretty good card, right? You can sort of entice your opponents to draw a card, and their greed might play into it. They'll want to draw that card, or maybe they actually need the card, so they draw the card, and now all their spells cost 2 more to cast this turn. Sort of a bit of a trap card. I like it a lot. It's really interesting. Getting to the actual list, though, coming in at number 20, Tiller Engine, 2-mana, artifact, creature, construct, 1/3. Whenever a land enters the battlefield tapped under your control, choose one. Untap that land or tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. So this card's been getting quite a bit of buzz already. I've seen a couple people talking about it. It's okay, it is very specific in what it's doing. You have to be careful here because this is whenever a land enters the battlefield tapped under your control. So this is not a normal landfall trigger. If you just play a basic land, this isn't going to do anything, right? It's only going to trigger if you play a land that enters the battlefield tapped. Now, of course, if you're playing lots of those lands, this can be really good. It's essentially an amulet of vigor. It's going to untap the land you just played. And again, you have to be careful with the wording here because this says untap that land. You can't untap your Gaia's Cradle with this. You have to untap the land that you just played, or you can tap a non-land permanent opponent control. So if you don't really care about untapping that land because you don't really need to cast anything, you can just tap down something of your opponent's. This card is definitely going to see play in the format. I don't think it's fantastic. It definitely is going to see play. It's going to be great in those 5-color decks where you are playing lots of lands like Triumphs that enter the battlefield tapped. Also, if you're ramping, a lot of times the ramp will put those lands into play tapped, which will then untap them. So it is good there. It also, I'm sure, has some combo potential as well. Works really great with bounce lands. It's definitely going to see play. It is pretty niche though. Coming in at number 19, Mana Cannons, 2 and a red enchantment. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, Mana Cannons deals X damage to any target where X is the number of colors that spell is. This card, again, is very niche. I don't think you're going to put it in every deck. Certainly, it's not very good in a mono red deck. Even a 2-color deck, it's not fantastic. But once you start getting up there in colors, it gets really good. I like to keep the more niche cards or archetype-specific cards towards the bottoms of these lists. And this is definitely one of those. It's really good in a 5-color deck. Whenever you cast your commander, right? Your commander is going to be 5 colors probably. This is going to deal 5 damage to any target. So just casting your commander dealing 5 damage to any target's pretty good. Any of your other multicolored spells, right? If I cast a Assassin's Trophy, for example, that's a 2-color spell. Now I'm going to deal 2 damage to any target as well. Just really nice value. I love having these enchantments that just sit on the battlefield and just give you value whenever you do a particular thing. It is very specific. It's certainly not going to go in every deck, but I think it can go in quite a few. Coming in at number 18, Defiler of Flesh, 2 black, Phyrexian Horror, 4/4 with Menace as an additional cost to cast black permanent spells, you may pay 2. Those spells cost black less to cast. If you paid life this way, this effect reduces only the amount of black mana you pay. And whenever you cast a black permanent spell, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. So of course, if that first ability seems familiar, it is because of course it is essentially Phyrexian mana. And I'm actually surprised they did this. Okay, so there is an entire cycle of these cards, one for each color. All 5 of them will be appearing on this list. This is the least impressive to me. They're all great, obviously. For me, I'm looking at the last ability as to where I'm going to put it on the list. And this one, even though it is in black, which probably means there's a lot of busted things you can do with it, the last ability is the least impressive of the bunch. So it's the lowest on the list. It's obviously still fantastic, and it's obviously still going to see a ton of play. I'm actually shocked they did this cycle because, you know, it was sort of understood that Phyrexian mana was busted, and I didn't think they were going to revisit it. So it is a little surprising that they did this. For sure, this entire cycle is going to see play in the format without a doubt. Better in some situations than others. I like that they did it only permanents, right? Because now we can't get into some really crazy scenarios. It is limited that way. I like that a lot. This one's pretty good. It's definitely going to see play, but of course, as we get up the list, we are going to get to the better ones. Coming in at number 17, the Elder Dragon War. 2 red enchantment saga has this new ability, Read Ahead, which essentially means you can skip chapters, right? Typically when you play a saga, it starts at chapter 1, then goes to 2, then goes to 3. Here you can read ahead, so when it enters the battlefield, you can choose a chapter and put that many lore counters on it, so you're starting with that chapter. And that actually can be really, really good if you want to skip ahead to something that you really want, right? So chapter 1, the Elder Dragon deals 2 damage to each creature and each opponent. Pretty good. Little mini board wipe. That's definitely usable. Chapter 2, discard any number of cards and draw that many cards. Also a very usable ability. Works in a lot of discard decks. Also works great in a lot of mono red decks where you just want to maybe getting rid of useless cards and drawing some more useful stuff. Chapter 3, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. All those are very usable. Again, especially in red, you're doing a lot of very red stuff there. This card could go in literally any mono red deck, I think. But again, what makes it particularly good is you can skip ahead. So if I have a commander that has a 2 toughness, I don't want to play that first chapter because it's gonna die, so I can just skip ahead. I'll skip ahead to the discard. Maybe I want to do that. Or if I just want to pay 4 mana to put a 4/4 red dragon token into play, I can just do that, right? I can just skip the first 2 chapters, pay 4, get a 4/4 flying dragon token, and that is all. So all these abilities very usable in a commander game, but the fact that you can read ahead and skip over stuff if you want to makes this card even better, I think. Coming in at number 16, Temporary Lockdown. 1 white enchantment. Whenever a temporary lockdown enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until temporary lockdown leaves the battlefield. What a great card. Definitely can find a lot of use in the commander format. You're probably going to get all the mana rocks, I would imagine. Might get a couple commanders, maybe, particularly in this set, actually. There's a lot of really cheap commanders. There is quite a few commanders that are 2 mana or less. But of course, where this card really shines is against tokens, right? Because all those treasure tokens, clue tokens, sapperling tokens, zombie tokens, they're all going to be mana value 2 or less. So you're going to hit all of them. And of course, the added bonus is they're not coming back, right? If someone gets your temporary lockdown off the battlefield, all those treasure tokens, zombie tokens, they're all gone. They're not coming back. So this card essentially reads exile all tokens, which is pretty darn good in a commander game, right? So this is a card that I think is going to fit nicely into a lot of decks if it doesn't hurt you, right? That's where I would play this deck. I'm not in a token theme. I'm not doing treasures or sapperlings or whatever. I'm going to try to find room for this in my deck. Coming in at number 15, Relic of Legends. 3 mana artifact. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Tap an untapped legendary creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. So of course, this is a bit of a callback to Coalition Relic, which I think is still a really good mana rock in the format. Doesn't see a ton of play anymore. Used to be an absolute staple. What I like about Coalition Relic is that it can add you 2 mana of different colors, which can be really important in like a 4 or 5 color deck, right? Not a lot of mana rocks doing that. In fact, there really isn't any. Is Relic of Legends legends straight up better. I don't know. I mean, this is a card that when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, a lot of people are going to play that. Or are they? This was a tough one. You know, I wasn't sure where to put it on the list. I think it's definitely going to see play. Now, it is a 3-mana mana rock, which people have been moving away from. However, this doesn't have to be in a legendary tribal deck. This just can be in any deck where you have a commander that isn't really doing anything other than just sitting on the battlefield using its static ability, right? So for example, my Rain Academy Chancellor deck, I can put this in there because my commander is just sitting there and I'm using its static ability. It's not attacking, it's not blocking. So now I can tap my commander to add mana. That seems pretty good, right? This just turns every commander into a mana dork. And a mana rock that is adding 2 mana, which essentially this is doing for 3 mana, is really good, right? So I actually think this is pretty good, and I think it is going to see a decent amount of play. And again, just like Coalition Relic, it is a 3 mana rock that can add you 2 manas of different colors, which can be really handy in a lot of decks. Coming in at number 14, Threats Undetected, 2 and a green, a sorcery. Search your library for up to 4 creature cards with different powers and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library and put the rest into your hand. I think this is a pretty good card. 3 mana to go get 2 creatures. If you just do that, I think that's pretty good. I'm not getting super excited about this card. I don't think there's any combo potential, anything like that. Giving your opponent the final choice is almost always going to hose whatever nefarious plan you have in mind. I think this is just a good value card. I think 3 mana to go get 2 creatures out of your deck and put them in your hand is pretty good. You can just pick 4 creatures that you want, right? I'm sure it's very easy to look through your entire deck on like turn 5 or 6, find 4 creatures that you really, really want in your hand. You end up getting 2 of them. I think that's pretty all right. I like it. Coming in at number 13, our second defiler, Defiler of Faith. 3 white, Phyrexian Human 5/5, Vigilance. As an additional cost to cast a white permanent spell. You may pay 2 life. Those spells cost white less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of white mana you pay. Whenever you cast a white permanent spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So I put this one a little higher than the black one. But some people might think that's nuts, but it fits in more themes, right? You're doing the soldier thing, so it fits in any soldier deck. You're doing the token theme, so it fits in any token deck. These cards are not going to be super great in a spellslinger theme, right? In a white soldier deck, I'm probably going to be playing a lot more permanents because I'm going to be casting my soldiers, which are likely permanents. So it's going to be a lot better in there because it's going to be used a lot more. I'm going to be able to use the first ability a lot more, and I'm also going to get the effect off of the second ability a lot more if I'm playing it in a deck where I'm going to be casting a lot more permanents, right? So I'm taking that into consideration as well. This one for me is the second best of the group. Coming in at number 12, Activated Sleeper, 2 and a black, Phyrexian Shapeshifter 00 with Flash. You may have Activated Sleeper enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, except it's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. I just think this is a fun, interesting card. It doesn't necessarily fit any particular theme, I don't think. The flavor of it is great. The whole Activated Sleeper thing is really cool. It has Flash for obvious reasons. I think you could put this in any deck. It's just one of those cards that is fun and interesting. And you kill one of your opponent's creatures that you really want off the table, and guess what? Now I can copy that creature as well. Just a fun, interesting clone effect in a commander game. Clone effects are always really great in a commander game. It's also mono black, right? Don't see mono black clones very often, so got to give it a mention for that reason as well. Coming in at number 11, Karns Silex. 3 mana legendary artifact. Karns Silex enters the battlefield. Tap. Players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities, so that's going to be pretty great. Again, any deck where you're not doing any of that, this could be a good include. But what makes this card, I think, very playable in the format is pay X and tap, exile Karns Silex, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less, activate only as a sorcery. So of course the activate only as a sorcery makes this a little bit worse, I suppose. If you look at similar effects like Nevinyrral's Disc, Oblivion Stone, those you can activate at any time, which makes them a lot better. However, I really like the X on Karns Silex, being able to choose the stuff that you're going to destroy. Again, I can just pay 0 for this if I want to and destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 0 or less, which means, again, I'm going to hit all those tokens. This is a great card to hate on treasure tokens if your opponents are doing that. Sapperling tokens again, all that kind of stuff. I also like the mana value X or less. If you look at stuff like engineered explosives, only going to hit stuff that is exactly that mana value, right? Ratchet bomb, all those kinds of cards hit exactly that mana value and nothing else. Here, you can go as high as you want. Maybe your commander costs 6, so I'm going to pay 5 into this, destroy each non-land permanent 5 or less, and my commander gets to stick around. I really like the X on this. You can choose whatever value you want for it at any point during the game, depending on what your opponents are doing, right? Definitely a card I think we're going to see in the format. And again, because it's colorless, always bump those colorless cards a little higher up the list because they can go in more decks. Coming in at number 10, the Cruelty of Gixx. 3 black, black. Enchantment Saga again has that read ahead ability. So chapter 1, target opponent reveals their hand. Choose a creature or planeswalker card from it. That player discards that card. That doesn't seem particularly fantastic in a commander game. Also not particularly good for 5 mana. However, chapter 2, search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. You lose 3 life. That's pretty good in a commander game, right? Tutoring always is. Chapter 3, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, people will probably point out that I can, chapter 1, look at my opponent's hand, choose a creature that I want. Then when I get to chapter 3, I can put that card, because they've discarded it, from their graveyard, because that last ability is any graveyard, onto the battlefield under my control. Sure, you can do that. I don't know if I want to risk it, right? The best ability on here is the searching, the tutoring, right? So I don't know if I want to risk not getting there, right? That's what's great about the whole read ahead thing, is if I really need that tutor, I can just 5 mana, skip chapter 1, go directly to chapter 2, and use this as a tutor. Now, 5 mana tutor is not great, especially if you're losing 3 life. However, 5 mana, I go get any card out of my deck, and then the next turn, I get to put any creature from any graveyard into play under my control. That is pretty good. Fantastic, in fact, I think. I probably would always skip over the chapter 1, unless there was a specific reason why I wanted to look at my opponent's hand. I would just immediately 5 mana, go get any card out of my deck, and then on the next turn, I get to put any creature from any graveyard into play. That seems great. I think this card can go in just about any deck. Coming in at number 9, Defiler of Instinct, the red one. 2 red, Phyrexian Kavu, 4/4, first strike. As an additional cost to cast a red permanent spell, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost red less to cast for each life paid this way. This effect reduces only the amount of red mana you pay. When you cast a red permanent spell, Defiler of Instinct deals 1 damage to any target. Again, I'm basing the effectiveness of these cards on that last ability mostly, right? And being able to throw damage around every time you cast a red permanent spell is great. And obviously it's always going to be good. If you look at the black one, giving a creature +1/+1 in menace might just be useless. If you don't plan on attacking, it doesn't do anything. Throwing damage around is always going to be good, right? We're always going to be able to just throw 1 damage at our opponent's face if we want to. There's no other good targets around. That is definitely a very usable ability in a commander game, and I think this card's for sure going to see a lot of play. Coming in at number 8, the green Defiler, Defiler of Vigor. 3 green, Phyrexian Worm, 6/6 with trample. As an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost green less to cast. If you paid life this way, this effect reduces only the amount of green mana you pay. Whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Wow. So again, this one I put up the list because that last ability is actually really good. And again, in a green deck, I say it's probably likely you're going to be casting permanent spells a lot, right? You're going to be casting a lot of creatures. You're going to be triggering that ability a lot. This just goes in any deck that's doing the +1/+1 counter theme for sure, but also you can put it in any creature heavy deck. Putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature, man, that's really good. I thought maybe they would go with put it on a creature. No, you're putting it on your entire team. That's fantastic. If I cast 3 green permanent spells in a turn, which is not unlikely, because again, remember, you're paying the Phyrexian mana here, so you can pay life into them. It can be a lot cheaper. I can cast the Llanowar Elves for free, right? And when I do so, putting a +1/+1 counter on all my creatures, so you can easily put 2, 3, 4 counters on your entire team in a turn. This guy can really be a way to close out a game in a lot of decks, on top of the fact that he's making your spells cheaper. Definitely going to see a ton of play in the format, I think. Coming in at number 7, Roboran Mercenaries. 3 and a white human mercenary. 3/4 with Vigilance. Roboran Mercenaries has all activated abilities of all legendary creatures you control. Wow, what an interesting card. Obviously, it just goes in every deck. Well, I shouldn't say obviously, likely it goes in every deck where you have a white commander, obviously because you need the white color identity, that has an activated ability. How many is that, you're asking? Well, from what I found, 136. There is 136 commanders in the format that are white that have activated abilities that your Roboran Mercenaries will have as well. That's a whole lot. Now, of course, a lot of them are like, okay, well, maybe I don't want my Roboran Mercenaries to have my commander's ability, but a lot of them actually are, and a lot of them can be absolutely fantastic. Like, this is essentially like copying your commander, right? That's what you're doing, because if your commander has that activated ability that you really, really want to use, this is essentially having another copy of your commander on the battlefield, right? If I'm playing a Brigid Hero of Kinsbale deck, I don't really care that she's a 2/3 with first strike. I'm building around her activated ability. Tap and deal 2 damage to each attacking and blocking creature. Now my Roboran Mercenaries can do that as well. So now I'm dealing 4 damage to all attacking and blocking creatures. Obviously, it's going to be an absolute auto-include in that deck. Fantastic. How about Captain Sisay? What an absolute auto-include in that deck. Now I can tap my Roboran Mercenaries to go search my library for a legendary card. And again, that's all you care about with Captain Sisay is the activated ability. So this just gives you an extra activation of your commander's ability if your commander happens to have one and is in white. This card's going to go in a ton of decks for sure. Coming in at number 6, Gerard's Hourglass Pendant. 1 mana legendary artifact with flash. If a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Pay 4 mana, tap, exile Gerard's Hourglass Pendant, return to the battlefield tapped all artifact, creature, enchantment, and land cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So I don't know how much buzz this card is getting. I think a lot of people might be surprised with how high I put it on this list. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And the main reason why it is so good, in my opinion, is because it has flash. This card, first of all, is 1 mana, colorless, counterspell my opponent's Time Warp, which I think is just such a fun thing to do in a commander game, right? Because it has flash, obviously you can cast it any time. So if your opponent's about to cast that Time Warp, for 1 mana, you flash it in, and when their Time Warp resolves, they will of course skip it. So it's essentially a 1 mana counter or an extra turn spell, which is super, super interesting and fun. But also the fact that it has flash pays into the second ability as well. Now, of course, you have to pay 4, so you will need 4 mana open total in order to make this work. But again, your opponents think they're going to board wipe everything. This sort of becomes a not so great Teferi's Protection or a colorless Teferi's Protection a little bit. So I can flash this in. It doesn't matter when it happens. It can be before the board wipe resolves, probably after the board wipe resolves if it's hitting artifacts, obviously. So after that board wipe destroys everything, I can flash this in and then pay 4 and bring all my stuff back to the battlefield. But again, another reason why I put this so high up the list is because it's a colorless card. It can go in any deck. And this effect, right, we've seen this effect before of returning all my destroyed stuff to the battlefield, but it's always in white. So this is a great option, right? If I'm in that mono red deck, now I have a great way to protect against board wipes, which before I didn't really have any. That's where I really like this card. This is a card that you can put in a lot of decks that aren't particularly good at protecting their stuff or getting their stuff back out of the graveyard. And of course, there's a lot of colors that don't really do that. Love this card a lot. I'm definitely going to try to find room for it in a couple of my decks. Coming in at number 5, Silverback Elder. 2 green, 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 Ape Shaman, 5/7. Whenever you cast a creature spell, choose 1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Wow, that seems pretty good. If I didn't read anything else past that, this card is going to see play in a ton of decks, I think. A 5 mana 5/7 that whenever you cast a creature spell destroys an artifact or enchantment, that card goes in a ton of decks. For sure, without question. However, you can also look at the top 5 cards of your library and put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped. And you can also gain 4 life, so it's giving you all these other options as well. Worst case scenario, if I don't want to put a land into play and there's no artifacts and enchantments around, I can just gain 4 life every time I cast a creature spell. That seems pretty good. And honestly, in a late game commander scenario where your life is really low, just being able to cast a creature spell to gain 4 life, you know, I cast 2 or 3 creature spells in a row, I get back up there out of the danger zone, that can be really good. I think this card goes in every green deck that is playing at least a decent amount of creatures, which of course most green decks are, right? I mean, it's so good. It does have the 3 green pips in there, so I don't know if I would go as high as like 3 colors. Maybe you could do 3 colors with this. Like a really creature heavy 3-color deck might want this, like an Animar deck, maybe. I kind of like that they did that, obviously, because now you can't just put it in every deck, which if this cost 4 and a green, probably would start going in a whole lot of decks. So I like the 3 green to limit where it can go. But other than that, I mean, you just need to be playing lots of creatures, and not even a lot, just a decent amount of creatures. Casting a creature spell, I destroy an artifact and enchantment, right? Even I just cast my commander, I get to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Seems pretty darn good. Coming in at number 4, Defiler of Dreams, 3 blue, Phyrexian Sphinx, 4/3 with flying. And of course, the blue one ends up being the best of the bunch. I shouldn't say of course, that's not always the case, but here I think it definitely is. So again, as an additional cost to cast a blue permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost blue less to cast. You know the rest. Whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, draw a card. Jeez. They had to give the blue the whole draw card thing, of course. This is, I think, probably a head and shoulders above the rest. Also is a flying creature, which I think is really, really good. Having both of these fantastic abilities stapled on a creature is really good. And then on top of that, I can fly in for 4 damage every turn also is really nice. But obviously, the fact that every time you cast a blue permanent spell, draw a card is just fantastic. I will say though, you know, a lot of people might point out that this isn't nearly as good as people might think it is, because a lot of blue decks are casting instants and sorceries, in which case you won't be drawing cards. And again, that's why I like that they didn't go overboard here. They only said it's permanent spells. But again, I think there is a lot of cases where you are going to be casting those blue permanent spells and drawing cards very easily. Even if you only get like 2 or 3 draws off of this, it's certainly worth putting in your deck. And again, the mana reduction as well, right? Don't forget about that part. I also will point out what I like about this cycle is the fact that it is only a blue permanent, only a blue spell. So how many of these are going to go in, again, like a 3-color deck? How often are you going to be casting blue permanent spells in your Teamer or Sultai deck, right? It might not be that much. So I really like that this cycle leans heavily towards monocolor decks. Obviously, this card is way better in a mono blue deck, right? Certainly the best of the bunch, I think. I don't know. If someone thinks that maybe one of the other defilers are better than this one, I guess make the argument in the comments below. Drawing a card seems pretty good, so I think this might be the best one. Coming in at number 3, though, the Phasing of Zhalfir, 2 blue Enchantment Saga, and again has that read ahead ability, which is particularly important here. So chapter 1, another target non-land permanent phases out. It can't phase in for as long as you control the Phasing of Zhalfir, and chapter 2 is the same. So if we just had that ability, I think this is a very usable card. Being able to phase out a non-land permanent for a couple of turns can be really, really good. Can be your stuff or can be opponent's stuff, right? This is so open-ended. I can target my opponent's stuff if I want to get it off the battlefield. It can be like an Oblivion Ring type of effect. Temporarily, I get my opponent's stuff off the battlefield. I can also phase out my stuff if I want to protect it. And why would I want to protect it? Well, because of chapter 3, which is for sure the reason why I put this so high up on the list. Destroy all creatures. That's right. We have a mono blue card that is destroying all creatures. This is a mono blue board wipe. Now, of course, for each creature destroyed this way, its controller creates a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. You know, that's okay. Obviously, if your opponent has a giant team, in particular a giant zombie horde or something, this card isn't great, right? Against a Krenko deck, maybe this card isn't so great because destroying all those 1/1 goblins and replacing them with 2/2 Phyrexians is going to be not really much of a payoff there. However, the fact that it is a mono blue board wipe, that alone made me put it so much farther up the list. Again, this is cards for Commander, right? So I'm evaluating these cards on how valuable they are in the Commander format, and having a mono blue board wipe in the Commander format, of course, is fantastic. And again, read ahead, right? So I don't have to do the first 2 chapters here. If I'm really desperate and I got to destroy everything right now, I can just 4 mana destroy all creatures. That's what makes this card so fantastic. But of course, we can also play into those first 2 chapters and I can phase out my creatures, right? I think that that's where you want to use this. If you're looking to use all chapters, I can phase out my commander. On the next turn, I can phase out another creature I want to keep. And then on chapter 3, I can destroy all creatures. And of course, my creatures will then phase back in on my next untap. It also can be used fantastically there as well. Great card. I think overall, this is just a fantastic card that you can do a lot of stuff with. The fact that it's a mono blue board wipe, though, for me moves it way up the list. Definitely going to see play in the format. Coming in at number 2 is Sarah Paragon. 2 white angel, 3/4 with flying. And talking about a card that's going to see lots of play in the format, I don't see how this is not. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land card from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. Exile it, and you gain 2 life. So I'm sure there are some people out there that might not think this is a great card. I think a lot of people might think, oh, well, this thing I'm getting out of the graveyard gets exiled. So if I have a fetch land, for example, right, I can play the fetch land from my graveyard, and with other effects, like say a Crucible of Worlds, I can just keep playing it over and over and over again. True, I guess you could, but just getting 1 extra use out of it seems pretty good. And then also when you crack it, you get to gain 2 life, so you also get the life gain as well. This card obviously could go in any life gain deck, right? So again, now we start going over the scenarios of this card could go in almost any deck, but also the specific decks it can go in, like a deck that wants to be gaining life, which I have one, and this is going to go in any deck that is in white that might want to be playing lands out of the graveyard. So now you're in that sacrifice lands theme in white. I know who does that, right? Well, I have a patron with a Yumiji mono white lands deck that this card is definitely going to go in. By the way, if you want to see that deck in action, you can do it in my Commander gameplay video. Obviously, though, this isn't just lands. You're getting any permanent, right? You can cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. Doing it once on each of your turns, no problem. Is it better than a Sun Titan? That's sort of maybe the interesting discussion. Sun Titan obviously is a very popular card in the format. It used to be a lot more popular. I think 6 mana is getting to be a bit much for people. So the people that think that 6 mana is too much for what Sun Titan is doing might go after Sarah Paragon because it's only 4 mana. I don't know. Maybe people don't have this as high on their list as I do. I think it is for sure going to see a ton of play. I'm certainly going to put it in a couple decks. But coming in at number 1, another card that a lot of people thought maybe I was too high on, but I think I've got it just right, is Plaza of Heroes. A land, taps to add a colorless mana, not super fantastic, but also taps to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this only to cast a legendary spell. Of course, you can always do that with your commander, and the more legendary stuff you have in your deck, the better this card gets. Also though, tap, add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. So now it gets a lot better because once I have my commander in play, likely, not guaranteed, but likely I will be adding any mana of color that I need with this. But the main reason why I have this at number 1 is pay 3 and tap, exile Plaza of Heroes. Target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this is a way to protect your commander on a land. I am a huge fan of that. I like to put Yavimaya Hollow in my decks, even though it's really, really expensive. So I can only put it in so many. Tyrite Sanctum is another one that I really like a lot for protecting my commander, which is not super fantastic, but is a way to do that. Again, if you're in a color that doesn't protect your creatures very well, it sucks, right? If you're in that mono red deck, your commander keeps dying, it can really make things unfun for you. Having an option like this is great, but really this can go in any deck. And it's a good thing that I already made a video talking about this card, because now I can address some of the things that people have said where they think this card's not that good. First of all, just putting a card in your deck that only taps for colorless mana. If you ignore everything else, right? If those 2 middle abilities weren't there at all, I would still put this card in a ton of decks. A card that adds colorless mana and then protects my commander as well is going to go in my decks. That's Yavimaya Hollow. Yavimaya Hollow is a land that adds colorless mana that I can pay green to regenerate my commander. I would put that in all my green decks if I could afford to buy that many of them. So if we just ignore those middle 2 abilities, this is a card that taps for colorless mana, which is okay. We're always putting lands in our decks that tap for colorless mana, and then also I can use it to give my commander hexproof and indestructible, which will save it from pretty much everything. The other argument I heard, which I think is pretty silly, is okay, but now you have to hold up essentially 4 mana to save your commander. Okay, but that goes for any protection spell. I have to hold up 2 mana for heroic intervention. I have to hold up 3 mana for Teferi's protection. I have to hold up mana for a counter spell, right? That is always the case with everything. If I tap out, and by the way, you can go check out my 3 mistakes while playing your commander deck video, because that is exactly what I talk about in there about never tapping out. But if if you tap out, now you can't cast your Teferi's Protection or your Heroic Intervention either. So that argument plays into all those other options as well. If I have the mana open, now I can cast Teferi's Protection, and if I have the mana open, now I can use my Plaza of Heroes. So that argument of, oh, you have to hold up the mana, you don't have to hold up the mana. It's just a land that you're going to put in your deck anyway that taps to add mana, and wouldn't you know it, I happen to have it untapped, and I happen to have 3 mana open late in the game. I've already cast my commander like 3 times, so I don't want to have to do it again. Now I can sacrifice my land to protect my commander against that board wipe. That seems like it's worth putting in a deck. This isn't the greatest card ever. I'm putting it at number 1 on this list because, again, it is a colorless option that can go in any deck, and I think it could go in any deck because at some point you might be able to sacrifice it to save your commander or any other legendary creature you have. Seems pretty good to me. Again, I don't put the cards at the top of this list that are necessarily the most powerful. I put the cards at the top of this list that I think are going to see the most amount of play, right? Which, by the way, is the reason I did not put any 5-color cards on this list. I know a lot of people might be bringing up those cards. I purposely didn't put any 5-color cards on this list, and there are a bunch of great ones. If you are playing a 5-color deck, there's a whole bunch of cards that are probably auto-includes for you, but they only go in 5-color decks, right? They're very limited in the amount of play they're going to see because they can only go in 5-color decks and no other. Now, yes, a lot of people play 5-color decks, but it certainly is not the majority of the decks in the format. So that's why I didn't put any of those cards on this list, if anyone is wondering. But what else did I miss? What are some other great cards from this set that I didn't mention on this list? Let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.